Welcome, everyone, to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Alexander Zverev is your 2024 Paris Masters champion. He destroys Hugo Humbert in the final, 6-2, 6-2. Not a very fun final, but I promise it's going to be a fun show because we're not just going to talk about Zverev's triumph on Sunday over Humbert. We are also going to discuss the race to Turin and where we stand going into next week, where things are shaping up for a very exciting finish. And I want to start with Hugo Humbert's win over Carlos Alcaraz, because if that didn't happen, then we would not have gotten, of course, a Zverev Humbert final, first Masters 1000 final in the career of the Frenchman Hugo Humbert, who became a major headliner throughout the week. So let's go in reverse. Let's rewind. Round of 16 match after Humbert pulls out a really kind of tight, entertaining first round win over Brandon Nakashima, then beats Marcos Giron. Alcaraz bye in the first round. He beats Nicolas Jarry. And that sets up Alcaraz Humbert in the round of 16. But I think in order to talk about that, you have to start with something that Alcaraz said in press.
They played, for example, the Davis Cup indoor court, and the court was wise lower than this one. When I played the first match, the stats came out that it is the fastest court in the Master 1000 probably on the tour right now. This is crazy. I don't know, probably, and the fastest one in the last 10 years in this tournament. So I don't know why they do it. I don't know why they have changed a lot, a core from other tournaments, and obviously in the same tournament, comparing to other years. So it surprised me a little bit. So I came here with not too many days. Probably I had to came earlier to get used to these conditions, but I didn't. But I honestly, all I can say is I don't understand why they did it.
So I think those comments are very relevant. And on one hand, I get his frustration because nobody likes to be surprised. And it sounds like Alcaraz arrived in Paris not all that early, expecting to kind of have a grasp on what the conditions were going to be. And then he was like, whoa, this is different than what I'm used to. Alcaraz had played the event 3 times before, and he was a little bit caught off guard. And I do understand from a player standpoint, you play these events every year and they don't exactly send you a memo like, hey, we made the courts quicker, just a heads up for everybody so you can plan accordingly. So I get that part of it. And obviously, I was taken by surprise as well, just like Alcaraz. If you listen to my preview, I was like, yeah, Paris, it's slow. And then it wasn't slow this year. So I was going off of previous years, the reputation that Bercy had built as an event in terms of what the conditions usually are. At the same time, while I understand not wanting to be caught off guard by the conditions, it's obviously the same for everybody. And Alcaraz seems to have a sensitivity to this kind of thing, more so than a lot of other players. This is not the first time he's arrived at an event and he has expressed his frustration or his resentment with how fast the surface is. And this is something that I think, all players experience, right? Most players have some sort of preference for conditions, and obviously they want it to suit them as much as possible. And Alcaraz is making the argument, it's because of the fans and the entertainment. But, look, everybody has their own biases, and that's totally fine. But then it becomes a matter of getting in a positive mindset and avoiding the victim mentality and embracing the challenge and trying to adapt. And just based on the fact that Alcaraz at various points in his career has kind of seemingly been almost like rattled by surface speed, it does speak to maybe an area that he can improve. So that's the Alcaraz side of things. On the Humbert side of things, it's the total opposite, because you basically at this event, especially considering the court speed change, you've designed conditions for Hugo. If you went into a science lab and tried to make the perfect conditions for Hugo Humbert, I think this is what you'd come up with. and he's a proven giant killer. Before the Alcaraz match, he was 4-5 lifetime against top 5 players. Now, of course, you add a win, you add a loss to Zverev. He's 5-6 lifetime against top 5 players. His top 10 record is also outstanding. Now, coming into this event, Humbert, 5-6 lifetime, but I would have said it's too slow for him. Humbert is one of the most surface-sensitive players on the entire tour. You see that in terms of his splits between clay court events and grass and hard, but if you kind of zoom even further into what he does on hard court on a week-to-week basis, quicker the hard court, the better for Hugo Humbert. He wants slick, he wants fast. So the speed skyrockets this year, and that changes a lot for him. We already know that the indoor factor is something that Humbert enjoys. 3 of his 6 career titles have come indoors. Last 52 weeks, Humbert has played 5 indoor hardcourt events, including Paris. 5 events. And this was his 3rd final. Title in Metz at the end of last year. Title in Marseille this February. Hey, those are in France. This is in France. So he had won his last 2 French indoor hardcourt events. And I think we saw this week that the French crowd, it completely changes his energy and his personality. He played like he was possessed. He played like his life was on the line. He played with the maximum amount of fire and emotion and steely determination. So much so that he got carried away a couple of times. And I think he crossed the line against Karen Khachanov, who ended up being hobbled in that 3rd set, especially in the second half of that 3rd set. Not able to move very well. On a couple of occasions, basically hitting the deck and limping around. And Humbert at that time did not have the sense or the awareness to, at that time, tone down his celebrations, which he should have. So, you have a different Humbert mentally. You have a roof over his head and a 45 CPI, which is the fastest Masters 1000 CPI of the year, including events like Shanghai, which in past years has always been touted as like the fastest of all the Masters. And then if you look at this matchup, just the effective court speed on this matchup, right? What does court speed do? It de-emphasizes pace generation. It elevates redirection skills and precision. And from a technique standpoint, it is advantageous to be as short and compact as possible in the way you produce your ground strokes. Alcaraz is the pace generating guy. Alcaraz is the weight of shot guy. Humbert, he's the redirection guy. He's the precision guy in the matchup. Technique, same thing. Humbert's got those short, little compact ground strokes. Super, super tight. Gets him off very quickly. Alcaraz has the longer swings. So I think it's a big deal there. And then stylistically, right? You take kind of the surface part of it out of it. Stylistically, right? Alcaraz losses to players outside of the top 10 this year. Jarry, Dimitrov, Draper, Monfils, Botic, Mahach, and now Humbert. Now, I think 2 of those losses had to do with Carlos's level. And those are the 2 summer hardcourt losses, Cincinnati, U.S. Open. Alcaraz's game just wasn't in a good place at all at that particular time this year. So he wasn't playing well, and I think a lot of players probably would have been able to pick him off regardless of what style they were playing. So those, to me, are in a separate category. The others, Jarry, Dimitrov, Draper, Mahach, Humbert. The others are high-ceiling attacking players who went after the ball at every waking opportunity. They have big-time offensive capabilities, and their mindset was ultra-aggressive. Tennis Insights, which of course tracks when a player is in neutral, when a player is attacking, when a player is defending. Well, Tennis Insights has Alcaraz in that match defending in 64 points. Humbert defending in 41 points. Now, mind you, there can be a point where neither player defends. There can be a point where both players at a certain time defend. But in terms of total points in which one of the players was on defense, Alcaraz 64, Humbert 41. Really, really massive gap. It tells you that Humbert was making Alcaraz defend much more than Alcaraz was making Humbert defend. So all of these things considered, and I'll get to the match specifically in a second, but all of these things considered in terms of what style does Humbert play and what has Humbert shown the capability to do in the past and where he's had his success, what he's done to top players, what the conditions mean for this matchup, and how Alcaraz was feeling coming in about the conditions. I would say this loss for Alcaraz makes a whole lot of sense, and I think you'd have to disregard a lot of those facts in order to make an argument that it was a particularly bad loss for Alcaraz. And that's rooted ultimately in, yes, some shortcomings for Carlos, but also a lot of respect for what Hugo Humbert can do if you put him on a fast indoor hard court in France. All right, what happened in the match? Well, Alcaraz serve, it was getting pummeled early on in set one. So, there were countless examples where Alcaraz was hitting a serve, the ball was coming back so quickly on the return that Carlos was basically defending off the first ball instead of attacking a +1. I've also been somewhat critical recently of just how many backhands Alcaraz has been missing at times. And, I don't think it's been a glaring issue, but I think it's been a slight opportunity for improvement for Alcaraz as of late. And in the first set, it was pretty bad. There were a lot of backhand misses. It was erratic, to say the least. So set one wasn't all that close. Alcaraz did find a better level, found some solutions on the second serve to avoid, getting completely assaulted by Humbert, and wins the second set. The third set is close. Really good offensive execution by Hugo on serve. And Alcaraz starts to serve a lot tougher as well. So it's a tight third set with a lot of holds where both players are, I think, attacking really well on a fast indoor hard court. 5-6 game, Alcaraz serving. Humbert comes up with a really good combination of passing shots. And the first pass went hard right at Alcaraz, which I think is such a great way to pass Carlos. Kind of impossible to drop volley when the ball's getting kind of gunned directly at you. You don't have really those options for the short angle. So I think Alcaraz is so good at, even when he's stretched out, so good at angling off drop volleys. And even when the ball is low, Alcaraz is able to kind of handle the dipping passing shot really well with the way he can soften his hands. But one that I think is pretty good against him is when you just go bullet right at him. And Alcaraz just kind of floated that first volley deep, and then Humbert was able to make a much cleaner, he had a much cleaner look at the second leg of the two-shot passing combination and was able to rip a backhand past Alcaraz. There was an Alcaraz double fault in there. Carlos tried to go body serve, and Humbert did a nice job of kind of fighting it off and hitting a hard return right up the middle. Alcaraz missed this +1 forehand where he was clearly rushed. He was clearly unsettled by the pace coming in. Just didn't have time to really produce the +1 forehand like he would have wanted. Match point, neutral, backhand unforced error, hit it long. And that was your break of serve, and that was the match. So Humbert beats Alcaraz and keeps the momentum going with wins over Jordan Thompson and Karen Khachanov, despite being really, really tight in the opening set. Was able to kind of relax a little bit. And then ultimately the third set was a lot easier for Hugo because Khachanov was injured. Meanwhile, Zverev, he ends up beating Griekspoor, Fils, Tsitsipas, and I made a post-match analysis on that one. It's up on YouTube. I beat Rune in the semifinal to set up this championship Sunday with Humbert. Zverev delivers a beatdown in this final. 6-2, 6-2. As I said at the top, he made it uneventful, uncompetitive, a little anticlimactic, but it was a stunning performance by him. He becomes world number 2 this week. He enters Turin as the wins leader, even ahead of Jannik Sinner. That speaks to the fact that, well, he's been healthier than both Sinner and Alcaraz. And in some ways, by some metrics, he's been more consistent when healthy than Alcaraz. And that's why he's ranked above Carlos despite the major titles. Alcaraz has missed 3 Masters 1000s. Zverev played all 9. That kind of thing makes a big difference, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But as far as like Zverev's season goes, I think first half was pretty immaculate, and it slowed down in the second half because Zverev caught pneumonia around the Olympics. He wasn't horrible at any point. He was fighting through it, I'd say really well, but he was missing some spark and some energy in his game. He was struggling to, I guess, put together big runs and big wins for a few months there. And I thought maybe he'd need the offseason to fully reset. Not the case. Didn't need to wait until the offseason because he looked a lot healthier this week, and he's able to capture his second Masters 1000 of the year. By the way, remember I picked Zverev to win Paris last year? And then this year I picked him to lose early to Arthur Fils. That was good. Love that. As far as the final itself, I want to start with the vibes. Let's start with the vibes. I don't want to make it sound like Humbert made it to the final on vibes. I mean, that's not really how the game of tennis works. But if you watched any of his matches, I think it was pretty clear that, it was, as far as the environment, it was very hostile for Humbert's opponents. And we already talked about how I think Hugo's mental game and his personality on the court was very much different from what we normally see. And clearly, it made him a tougher competitor, and it made him more difficult to deal with in a lot of different ways. But in this match, I think a good place to start is with the fact that at 2-all, Humbert makes 3 very sloppy forehand unforced errors. And none of the forehands were particularly difficult. There was not a lot of pressure on any of them. And he just sprayed 3 forehands in this game, and he got broken. And then Zverev, very early on, got into this confident zone where he started hitting his forehand with a lot of conviction very early, just dictating with big forehands. And you just know you're in trouble when you're playing Zverev and that starts happening. It is the one thing that you can sometimes rely on against Zverev, is in these baseline rallies, you might get some looks by going to his forehand. And, he could get a little bit soft off of that wing, a little bit attackable off of that wing. And that just wasn't happening. And then I'd say an even bigger problem for Humbert was that he was getting neutralized offensively by the things Zverev was doing. First of all, a lot of deep middle ground strokes from Zverev. And Humbert's ability to redirect line just doesn't come into play when he's having to operate from the middle of the court. Now, of course, you can't groove the ball short into the middle of the court and expect to have success, because, of course, Humbert is going to be able to kind of get to his offense from those sorts of positions. But when you're playing deep middle, quality up the middle, I think it's difficult for Hugo to really kind of break open rallies and inflict damage, because the ball he really kills is the short ball with some angle. The short ball with some angle. And I just thought Zverev, there was a lot of deep ball, no angle. I thought that was effective, because when they're exchanging in the middle half of the court, Zverev is much more resilient to depth and pace. He's got better shock absorbing qualities. So if we're just going to kind of play linear here, Humbert, you might draw an error out of Humbert with depth, with a good deep ball that has some heat on it, some pace on it. Zverev, not really, right? I mean, he is such a good absorber as far as, defensive capabilities go. And part of this is his court position, right? Humbert hugs the baseline. He's on top of the baseline looking for that short ball so that he can pounce. Zverev hangs back a little bit more, so the depth doesn't damage him as much. The pace certainly doesn't damage him very much. It's just difficult to rush. So if they're going to play that game where they're just exchanging blows through the middle, Humbert can be vulnerable there. Zverev can't be vulnerable there. And that's where you started to see a massive gap in consistency. The longer points stayed neutral, the more it was clear that there was a huge gulf in the consistency between the two. One thing that Humbert can do is just gain early advantages with serve-return dynamic. That was very hard for Hugo to do as well, because Zverev has an elite backhand return. Humbert's going to use that wide serve position. He's going to hit that lefty slider. And as a right-hander, if you don't hit a perfect return, you are screwed because you're off the court. And Humbert, being the incredible redirector that he is, like, even if you hit a average cross-court backhand return, you're probably screwed. You have to hit a great return. And Zverev is just uniquely capable of doing that with his elite two-hander on the return of serve. And then on the other side, like, Humbert likes to be offensive on his return. It's really important in his game to be able to do that so that he can inflict damage right away and start playing offense. Zverev's serve is just too big. It's too big for Humbert to be able to pull that off. So the serve return stuff wasn't really allowing Humbert to get into his groove. The baseline rallies, the way Zverev was playing those, wasn't allowing Humbert to play his game. And then the consistency. That's where Zverev pulled away. First set stats were crazy, right? They each hit 7 winners. Unforced errors are 16-4. Humbert 16, Zverev 4. 10 on the forehand for Humbert. Zverev, first set, wins 16 of 17 serve points. Only hits 5 unreturned serves. He only made 53% of his first serves. So Zverev has a bad serving set in the first and still only loses 1 serve point. It was really about destroying Humbert in the ground exchanges. Zverev actually lifted his serving level in the second set, and that didn't help matters for Hugo, although Humbert was also a little bit cleaner off the ground for the most part. Unforced errors at a set and 4 love were 24-5. Obviously a down performance from Humbert. I just want to throw a couple of theories out. Part of you wonders if the social media backlash may have played an effect. It wouldn't be the first time. I remember talking to Jack Draper at the U.S. Open this year about what it was like for him after the Felix Auger-Aliassime incident. He said he didn't sleep, completely felt out of sorts the very next day. I don't know if that could have happened to Hugo here with just the vitriol that was coming his way after the Khachanov incident, which I thought Khachanov was kind of right to be pissed off. I've already said that. But that could have affected Humbert for this final. I don't know. You also look at how much emotional energy he was burning every single match. Doesn't seem very sustainable. I mean, maybe you can do it for a whole week. Obviously did it for 5 matches in a row. But if you are going to live and die with every point, if you are going to be celebrating every single win, and there is just a lot of emotional energy in these matches for Humbert. Did that take a toll in the end? Obviously, you have the more conventional explanation that it was a big occasion and it was his first Masters final, and that he just may have been overcome with nerves. I do think that he, early on, looked at least liberated enough to play his game. Like, I thought he looked more nervous at the start of the match against Khachanov, to be completely honest. But that could have been part of it as well. And then the last thing I'll say is Humbert, he's not really a plan B guy. So when he's getting dominated in a match, when things are starting to get away from him, it's tough for him to really shift things tactically. And sometimes that can be a settler. You can feel like, okay, let's reset, let's start doing something else. And maybe that can kind of give you the spark you need to sort of turn things around. That's rough for Humbert. Kind of plays one way. Not really going to introduce a lot of different heights or a lot of different spins. Not somebody who's going to alter his return position. Not somebody who is going to, start to break things up with a lot of net rushing or a lot of drop shotting. There's not a lot of options for him to cycle through. And that may be added to sort of the panic and the helpless feeling that may have been setting in as Zverev dominated him. So that's it on Humbert. I do want to say one other thing about Zverev. There's a serving adjustment that I've talked about before that I'd like to see Zverev make. I've talked about it throughout the year. Lower percentage on the first serve, more aggressive spots. And the reason I have advocated for that is because I believe against the top players, against Alcaraz and Sinner, his serve is getting neutralized too often. And he hasn't been able to use that as the decisive weapon in big matches for the most part. And this week, he was below his season average in every match he played as far as first serve percentage. Every match he played, he was under it. And he was low 60s twice. He was low 60s in this final, and he was also low 60s, I think, in his first match of the week against Talon Griekspoor, which is actually kind of rare for him because he averages 71% first serves in. But while he was below his season average in percentage, he beat his ace rate in every single match other than the final, and he beat his first serve win percentage in 4 of 5. Now, conditions, really, really fast. That's going to help your ace rate. That's going to help your first serve win percentage. And in that sense, it is by no means conclusive that Zverev sort of is making this shift towards a more aggressive first serve strategy. But statistically, this is kind of where I'd like to see him go heading into Turin. Very similar conditions. And if Zverev is going to win the title there, it's not going to be because he serves a high percentage of first serves. Not against Sinner, not against Alcaraz. Their returns are so good. It's going to be because he's hitting spots. It's going to be because he's hitting a lot of aces. He's getting a lot of unreturns, and he's holding easily, and he's not having to get himself win as many kind of neutral baseline exchanges because the serve is acting as a very, very damaging weapon. That's going to be why. Speaking of Turin, let's talk about the race because it is very tight going into the final week, tighter than I can remember in a long time. There's also the question of, is Djokovic going to play the year-end championships? And if the answer is no, then things are already mostly settled. But I think right now everybody is operating under the assumption that Djokovic will be lacing it up at the ATP Finals. And that, by the way, assumes that he does finish top 8 because there's one scenario where Djokovic actually misses the cut. And that's if both Rublev and de Minaur win titles. Rublev is playing Metz, and de Minaur is playing Belgrade. It's a week of 250s on the ATP Tour. Ruud is also in Metz, and Ruud's status is not fully secure either. So the scenario is Ruud at number 7 is 110 points ahead of de Minaur at number 8. So I just gave you the scenario for Djokovic. The scenario for Ruud is that he clinches if he makes the semifinal in Metz, or if one of de Minaur or Rublev doesn't make the final. That doesn't seem like a super unlikely scenario, especially Ruud not making the semifinals, because he plays Roberto Bautista Agut likely in his first match. That's been a tough head-to-head for Casper. I believe he's 3-1 down. And the way RBA has been playing and the way Ruud has been playing, that's a 50-50 match as far as I'm concerned. Then you have the Rublev versus Minaur, which is the most interesting part of all of this. 25 points separate the two. Minaur currently in that 8th spot. And they're the top seeds, respectively, in the 250s this week. So that part is kind of where you're getting your popcorn ready. Let me just say this to start. As far as Rublev and Minaur are concerned, there are so many reasons to be thrilled for whoever gets this done and locks up their spot in Turin. Sentimentally, there are a lot of reasons to be thrilled. I just think for Rublev, going for his 5th in a row, what an accomplishment. What a feather in his cap. What a great representation of how good he's been, how consistent he's been at the top of the game, towards the top of the game for the last 5 years. I think it would be the ultimate affirmation of that. I think it would be line number 1 on Andrey Rublev's resume. Minaur is going for his 1st. And it's a level, right? Making an ATP Finals, it's a level that it didn't look like Minaur would ever get to. He's had the best year of his career, and I know at the start of the year, Minaur wanted that, to end at the year-end championships as a member of the top 8. And he's almost there, right? He might get there after a lot of years in his career where it looked like he would never get there because he was stagnating between that kind of 18 in the world and 32 in the world kind of range. Got over the hump. First top 15 finish last year. Has a chance for his first top 8 finish this year, but it's certainly going to be top 10. Then you get to the question of who has had the better year. Who's been better this year? And if you're not a Rublev fan or not a Minaur fan and you're not particularly attached to either of those storylines, you might just be rooting for the guy who you think has been the better tennis player this year. So I was kind of chewing on that. I was trying to think about that as a neutral. And I think it's pretty simple where I landed. We'll get into the nuance of it, but first I want to just get into the simple part of it. One guy, Alex de Minaur, has had most of the second half of his season hijacked by a substantial hip injury. And here we are, last week of the season, and he's in this conversation. What does that tell you? De Minaur, he played one event in a 3-month span from mid-July to mid-October. He missed Canada. He missed Cincinnati. He missed Shanghai. He didn't get to compete in the Wimbledon quarterfinal, where, given Djokovic's state, not up to 100% in hindsight, maybe Alex could have gotten it done. Wasn't able to compete there. Had to withdraw. No, Rublev hasn't been perfect. He got sick in Madrid, won it, but obviously it certainly took its toll the next week in Rome. He had surgery after the U.S. Open. But look, as far as I can tell, as far as I can see, Andrey Rublev didn't miss 1 week on his calendar. He played every single event that he set out to play, that he intended to play. Didn't play the Olympics, but instead played Washington, D.C., right? Actually helps his ranking, actually helps his standings in the race compared to a player who played the Olympics. So, I understand there have been plenty of challenges for Rublev over the course of the year, but he has at least been able to show up and play the entire season. De Minaur is not. De Minaur has played 7 fewer events than Andrey Rublev has. And he's still won 5 more matches. His win rate is 10 points higher. And I don't really think you can say, well, it's about the big events. And yeah, if you count every match the same, De Minaur's record might look better, but let's look at the big events. Well, because the biggest events are majors. And wait a second, De Minaur has 5 more wins across the majors compared to Rublev. Alex went 4th round, quarterfinal, quarterfinal, quarterfinal. Rublev, if you look at the 4 majors, has 5 fewer wins than De Minaur. So I think like that's kind of that's what goes into it. That's why this is still a conversation between De Minaur and Rublev, despite the fact that Alex has played far fewer events because of the hip injury. And to me, that speaks volumes in this conversation. Now, there are arguments for Rublev. He had bigger runs. He won Madrid. He made the final in Canada. De Minaur, and this is a pretty damning one, he didn't make a big semifinal. So at Masters 1000s and majors, there were a lot of quarterfinals, and there were not semis. And for that reason, it's mostly just the Madrid title. You could say, look, for me, and they each won 2 titles, but for me, it's about big titles, and I'd rather have Andrey's here, just for that one highlight. And that's okay. I get that, but I don't think it necessarily translates to an argument that Andrey's body of work has shown that he's been the better player overall in 2024. I think the best argument for Rublev is that health counts. That health counts, that part of this game is being available and staying healthy. And that is 100% true. The way I look at it, that's been Rublev's main advantage over De Minaur. Health, the ability to play the full calendar. Because this wouldn't be a conversation if De Minaur doesn't get hurt at Wimbledon. And I always want to see a guy rewarded for elevating his game to a top 8 level, which I think clearly Alex has done this year. So again, whatever happens, I'll be thrilled for each of them. But as far as who I think has had a better year, I do think De Minaur has been the better tennis player in 2024 as a whole. Let's see what happens. All right. Mets Belgrade. It's going to be fun. I'm going to be on the call for Tennis Channel as well. So I will shout that out. Make sure that you are subscribed to The Draw, my weekly newsletter where I curate the best tennis content on the internet, delivered straight to your inbox every Tuesday morning. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.